Oh, hear the bell.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, my name is Nora Chavez, and this is
James Baca.
and we are with the Baca Family Historical Project here in New Mexico, and we welcome you to our exhibit. We are right now at the Gutierrez Hubbell House, which is located in the South Valley of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's part of the Bernalillo County open space areas, and they also have the house, which is the museum, and you'll get to see part of the house as we walk in to see our exhibit, which is called Baca Family Weddings Through Time. So come on along, follow us.
You'll get to look at the wedding dresses as well as wedding pictures. You'll have a great time. Enjoy.
Follow us on in. So what you're going to see here, this is the portal. The house was rebuilt in 2000. They asked volunteers to come and make adobes by hand the way they used to. And there's a kitchen, another room here, and then we're going to walk into what is now the museum itself. And you can see this property is on the National Register of Historic Places. So come on in. This is what can I say, it was rebuilt because when the house was first bought by the county, it was just in rubbles. And it belonged to Josefa Baca, which was one of the few women who got her own land grant in the state of New Mexico. And I want to say she had like
40 acres.
No,
40
more than
acres.
40,000. She had huge.
It was a huge amount of acreage.
Yes, 40
yes,
acres
right.
is nothing. It was 40,000 acres.
And she had to get permission from the King of Spain to allow this.
So let's come on in, and you can see some of the pieces of a stagecoach. They raised horses, cattle, sheep here, which they sold a lot to the U.S. government, especially during the Civil War.
And above here is the family of the Hubbells.
Of the Gutierrez Hubbles, I like to use. Let's not forget the Gutierrez part, which was Josefa Baca. She's not pictured in here, but this was her land, and Juliana Gutierrez, which I believe is this lady right here, was her granddaughter, and she's the one who married James Santiago Hubbell, who was in the Union Army.
In the South Valley, what would happen is instead of calling him James, they called him Santiago.
Yes, which is in case you don't know, Santiago is James. Okay.
Okay.
So come on in. Look at these great double doors. And all of these walls are anywhere from 2 to 3 feet thick.
Now, if you look on this side, you'll see a family wedding.
In New Mexico.
And the big thing at the time, it wasn't who was invited, it was who wasn't invited in a town.
And this is the Josefa Baca family lineage that takes you all the way down to James. And these markers right here are right outside along Isleta Boulevard, outside in front of the entrance.
Now, if you look right across the street there, that is part of the Camino Real.
Yeah, that's the Camino Real now runs, or I should say I-25 runs parallel to the Camino Real. But here in Albuquerque, Isleta Boulevard was the Camino Real at one time.
Now here starts the weddings of New Mexico, and you'll notice some family pictures here. Okay, come on in and take a look at some of the wedding dresses.
So what we started with was we decided to cover 100 years of weddings in New Mexico, and that's from 1920 to 2020. So we start here with the 1920s style wedding dress, which I had to make because I could not find a 1920s wedding dress. But they were very popular. And as you'll see in the photographs here, our New Mexico brides wore them. And actually, the whole thing started with this photograph right here that we used on the cover of our book, which came out in 2020, The Legacy of Family. And I just fell in love with that dress. And James, I said, this is the most beautiful wedding picture I've ever seen. And so everything just kind of took off from there. And he kept sending me photographs, and each one was beautiful. And moving along to this dress represents the 1930s and 40s during World War II. Depending on you, this could have been your mom's dress or your grandmother's dress. And this dress started here in New Mexico, and the lace top came from the great-grandmother. The grandmother decided she wanted to leave this dress to her granddaughter, who was living in New York City. When she passed away, the dress was sent to New York City. When the granddaughter was ready to get married, there was no way she could fit in a 20-inch waist. So the seamstress she took it to said, well, she would have to cut, away from the train to get extra fabric. And she decided she did not want anything done to the dress. So when she saw that I was having the exhibit, she donated this dress to the Baca Family Historical Project. And this is from 1945, I believe, was when they got married. So it's got the original lace from the great-grandmother beading. There is, oops, here it is. The blue ribbon that's tied on there for your something blue. And Spanish brides historically here, because they were Catholic, very, very Catholic, they did not use a lot of the big bouquets at that time. Plus, fresh flowers were also hard to get during the 40s, during the war. They would carry their rosary and their Bible, the bride's Bible, and a small sprig of flowers. She is also wearing a traditional Spanish mantilla, which is the veil, and the Spanish comb.
You'll notice this picture right down here. Do you know? That's Horacio Chavez, and that's Consuelo Baca. Right next to it. Right here. Is Aunt Connie.
Is Aunt Connie?
It's his great aunt.
Oh, your great aunt. And then I don't know if you can capture this, but this is some of the items that brides would receive when they got married. It was very important that they had stuff to give parties, etc. You see one of the original bride wedding cake toppers. This is an original bride's book that would be official by the Catholic Church, and I believe that's from 1953. Then moving along here, this dress represents the 50s and 60s, when prosperity came back to the United States after World War II, and it was lavish. At that time, everything had to be big. This is Chantilly lace, huge big bouquet, Swarovski crystals for her crown. And we had the bride here who wore it originally in 1960, and then her daughter wore the dress again in 1980 when she got married.
Now, if you'll notice this is Merlinda Mondragon Sena. Her wedding was actually in the Fort Sumner, Clovis area of New Mexico.
Then coming along over here, this dress represents the 70s. And during the 70s, if you remember Little House on the Prairie, it was very, very popular. So the dresses, the wedding dresses took that style of a country wedding, a simple dress. And so we have here that kind of dress with the big hat and the bow. And we have a bride here on the plaque who's wearing it, and the shoes. And James, now back in New Mexico, when you got married, the man didn't just go and ask the girl to get married. Most of the times, he didn't know her, he had never met her, etc. And so it was called la entrada, or the ask, which was a letter. They would have dinner with the the bride's family, potential bride's family, and wedding was not discussed. And they would leave a note there in the parlor that would say why it would be a good match, whether it was for property, politics, money, etc. And then the bride's family had a week to respond. If they knew right away that they didn't want this marriage to happen at all, they would serve squash or calabacitas at dinner. And they knew right away it was a no. And there's a term up in, especially in northern New Mexico, that says le dieron la calabaza, which means it was nothing. It was not going to happen.
Now, my grandfather asked my grandmother to marry, and
this was what, in the 40s?
Yes, and this was October of that year. And he brought a pumpkin over and put it on the windowsill of my grandmother. And if she made a pumpkin, that meant she wanted pumpkin pie, she would marry. If the pumpkin was left out and it wasn't made, it meant she didn't want to get married.
So once, if the engagement went on, it was accepted, there would be another dinner over at the groom's house. Again, no talk of marriage. They would leave a letter saying yes, they accepted his proposal. And once that happened, it would take a year before the actual wedding would take place. In the Catholic tradition, this is before computers, they used to run the bands. Some of you may have heard of this or not, but all the Catholic churches in the state, pretty much in the region, would get notified that this marriage was going to take place. And it was a way of vetting the groom. Make sure he didn't have a wife and family somewhere else around the state, that they weren't aware of. And once that was done, but the bride would get a chest, handmade or purchased or whatever by the groom, and she would start getting lace and satin and dishes and whatever she might need to set up a household. Her trousseau, her wedding trousseau. So by the time, a year later, when the marriage actually happened, she would already have pretty much what she needed to start a family.
And you would know about the chests because your dad always makes those chests, and he redoes those chests, and they are beautiful.
That would be great. So come on in. Now we're moving more into the future. And we're going to start with this dress right here. This represents the 1980s. For those of you who remember, that was the era when Princess Diana got married. And her dress was huge, remember, with the big puffy sleeves and the long train. It was like 20 feet long. Well, one of the things, lace and pearls, etc., are very expensive. And what made this possible for the average bride to have a dress like this was, if you remember in the 70s, Nixon opened up China and our trade with China began. So all of this stuff was imported now instead of having been handmade or brought in from England or Spain. So, and just about any bride for maybe $1,000 back then or less could afford to have this kind of detail on her wedding dress. And it would just be outlandish. And if you look underneath, you can see it's all hand sewn. And some Chinese woman was earning her pennies a day doing that.
Now, because I did a lot of photographs, this is our cousin Carmen Campos when she married Joe Trujillo in the 1980s.
And that's my niece. Her mother was a Baca in Texas, which is when she got married in 1982, wearing one of these gigantic dresses. So then coming back over here, we just have the different styles of dresses. Now this dress is from 1930s. The wedding actually occurred in 1941, but it was brought in. Last week we had a presentation on our exhibit here, and one of the people who came brought this dress in. It was her mother's dress, and this is a gorgeous dress. We haven't had a chance to press it, but look at these photographs down here. Everything is really in mint condition. And satin, which is a natural fiber, will yellow over time. And I always tell people, if it's still white after 20, 30 years, it's not real.
It's not real. It's not the real.
The polyester dresses will be around 500 years from now. Again, here we have a more simpler dresses back in the 80s and in the 90s. We have the 60s, the mini dress, when The minis came in with the Beatles and stuff. And we have simpler dresses. And the reason was destination weddings became very popular to go get married in Mexico or get married in Hawaii. And who wants to carry a 20-pound dress like the one in 1980? It's going to have to get pressed again. So the dresses became much more simpler. This is another example of the 1950s and 60s, which they call the ballerina style. A lot of tulle, a lot of weight. And this is the prize of the collection. This dress belonged to, I can't remember her name, Ernestina Trujillo, who married Frank Hubbell in 1888,
Right.
I
correct.
believe. So this was her wedding dress. And then her great-granddaughter, Cynthia Hubbell, married in the same dress in 1957. And this dress was donated by the Hubbell family to the Gutierrez Hubbell house. So this dress is well over 100 years old and has to be treated with great care. It's definitely what we call the white glove treatment. We have to wear preserver's gloves to handle that dress and put it away carefully. And so here you see a variety of dresses again. This is Cynthia Hubbell. And then this is Emilio Chavez, and they got married in Las Vegas, New Mexico in 1927, I believe. Mm-hmm. This is Ernestina Trujillo, who married into the Hubbell family. This is Anita Hubbell, who was part of the family. And again, here's the book that we put out in 2020. And we're getting ready to come up with a newer edition, since there are more recent information that should be released about cerebral cavernous malformations, which if you are part of the Baca project, then you know what we're talking about.
It's good and the bad.
The good and the bad. And you can tell us about the rocking chair.
Now, the rocking chair is real interesting. If you'll notice this rocking chair, this is of my grandmother, Leandra Blvd. We knew her as Grandma Red because she had flaming red hair and real light complected. And these are her brothers and sisters. Now, as wedding gifts, the woman would always get a rocking chair, and the gentleman would get a regular chair. And the reason that you got a rocking chair was so they could rock the baby. And that's how
that was expected to come within a
very
year
expected.
Or so.
Mm-hmm.
And tell them how you got the chair.
This chair was on my grandmother's side, and we found it in a garage, and it was broken down. So my sister repaired it, and they had to cut off the front legs. If you notice, the back legs go long, the front legs are short. And she redid the
Had
chair.
to rebuild it. Mm-hmm.
And then a few years ago, she said she had no more room for it. And she asked me if I wanted the chair. And I said, I'll take this chair.
So will it get handed down to another niece or someone who's getting married?
More than likely, it'll be handed down to my sister Ramona, and it'll go to their nieces and nephews, my nieces and nephews.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it'll hand down.
So that's great. So it keeps continuing.
On the Baca side of the family, they've got a full rocking chair and chair that the Gallegos family has. And it's really beautiful.
So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed our little tour. It will be open here at the Gutierrez Hubbell House through March the 3rd. And I know that's cutting it quick, but that almost gives you a full month to come and stop by here to see it. And if you have any questions, you can always give us a call. We'd be more than happy to answer.
Make sure you come more than once, because you might miss something. There's a lot of stories here. You'll really enjoy it.
A lot of stories. There's a lot of different rooms with different exhibits that you can look at. Mm-hmm. There's also the great outdoor space, the orchards, the farming area. If you have kids, it's a great place to bring your children and let them run wild out there.
Enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.